once I understood that, I knew how to make a shift. And my goal became, I want people to feel good about paying their debt, because having a debt is this burden. And it just sort of slowly over time all worked out. And that's how I created the communication code, which eventually became my best-selling book.
This is the Entrepology Podcast, the podcast where we optimize the bodies, brains, and lifestyles of entrepreneurs, go-getters, and world-changing innovators.
Welcome to the Entrepology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Walker. As a naturopathic doctor and anthropologist, I optimize the health and performance of badass women working to change the world as entrepreneurs and go-getters. You know, people exactly like you. Your business, body, balance, and inner badass. These are the themes we are exploring. Before we jump into the interview, I want to invite you to join our free Facebook community, Legacy. If you want to be something amazing, you need to surround yourself with amazing people. The Legacy community is made up of badass women living, not leaving, but living our legacy every single day. We are leaders, parents, entrepreneurs, and innovators collectively committed to leaving the world better than we found it. My mission is to support the health and optimization of these badass superheroes, literally to places we never thought imaginable. If you are on a mission and get it that your health is the key to your unlimited potential, then join us. We are super awesome. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/groups/BE Legacy. See you there. So if I were to give you a multiple choice question, there's just two answers, and you have to pick the one that's most uncomfortable. I'm curious which one you would choose. If it was fill in the blank, many of us would say public speaking. But if I throw in this alternate option, it puts you in quite the corner. Here's option number 2. It is now your job to ask people for money, specifically debts. When people do not pay their bills, it is your job to call them up as your friendly neighborhood debt collector. That is the professional vocation of my repeat guest, Mary Shores. Now, somehow I missed this detail entirely when I interviewed Mary last year. We focused on her expertise as a conscious communicator and the methodology that she had developed around that. And it wasn't until Mary spoke at my event this past October, Impact Lives, where I learned that Mary's primary business was in fact owning a debt collection agency. It was in fact the experience of having to collect money on behalf of her clients that actually compelled Mary to develop the methodology that she uses with respect to conscious communication. There is probably not a conversation more difficult on earth than asking people for money they owe, and money they probably frequently don't want to or cannot pay. And Mary's mission in life is to leave those conversations with those people feeling better than when the conversation started. That is a challenge if I ever heard one. Today on the podcast, what Mary and I talked about was not only her methodology around conscious communications, but the energetics of money. How do we deal with this need for us as business owners to actually ask people for money? And how do we position the systems and language effectively within our own businesses to be able to do it? This conversation is as much about business as it is spirituality. And if you own a business where you collect money as part of what you do, which means you own a business, by the way, then we have got some juicy, important, and compelling details for you coming up. It is my pleasure to welcome back Mary Shores. Mary Shores, welcome back to the Entrepology Podcast.
Hey, Megan, it is so nice to talk to you again.
Well, I'm excited that you are here. It's been about a year since we had you on the podcast before. And in that time, you also came and spoke at my event, Impact Lives. And every time we chat, we realize we have all these different things that we can unpack and talk about. And something that I learned at Impact Lives that I somehow did not know about you before was what your core business was about. We got into communications and training with Hay House around writing books and all of these things, but didn't actually get into what your core business was. And so I want to push rewind, and I want to give you a chance to really tell your story as an entrepreneur and talk about your core business. And then we have a ton of places that we are going to go today.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that. Well, so I have a really unusual entrepreneurial story, which, by the way, I was really in awe of yours because you shared your story at the live event Impact Lives, and I was just so, I don't know, like the word admire comes to mind when I listen to your story and how you got your start and the trip you went on and all of the things you discovered. I just feel so honored to know you. So thank you for the good work that you do in the world. It's really, really necessary, especially now. So my story starts off from a bumpy place, which I actually think that a lot of entrepreneurial stories do start that way. You know, I was on my own at 16. If anyone wants to listen to the other podcast, I might have mentioned this, but I was on my own at 16 and I was about as poor as you could be without being homeless. I was still in high school and I was living with a boyfriend and his sister, and they were a little bit older than me by a couple of years. So that meant they were adults, but I was still a juvenile and ended up getting pregnant at a super young age at 19. And my daughter was born with severe brain damage, which was a result of lack of oxygen to the brain for over 5 minutes. And what this looked like was that she was blind, she was deaf, she was unable to suck a bottle. She had a gastronomy tube inserted into her stomach for feeding, and she lived for 1.5 years. And after that time, I really hit rock bottom. So she passed away in 1993, and I was just a basket case. I did a lot of regressing back into teenage behavior. But one thing that was very evident to me was that I was behind where all of my peers are or were at that time. Do you know what I mean? It's like my friends were graduating college, and I quite literally didn't have a pot to piss in. When I got this opportunity to start a business, I really jumped at it because I didn't feel like I had a lot of other alternatives. I felt like I would be stuck in very low paying jobs. I knew that I was smart. I mean, I think that when you're that age, you just think you know everything. But I wanted to do something else with my life. And so I opened a collection agency, which is a very unique and a very also male-dominated industry. And the reason that I was able to open a collection agency is because my parents had owned one growing up, and through some things that were going down in my family, like drama-wise, the business was closing. I had previously worked there, had developed enough relationship with some clients that I could go to them and have enough clients to get started with. And also, there's quite an uphill battle to get the proper licensing, which was hard because I was so young. I was actually the youngest person in the United States to open a collection agency when I was only 24.
This is amazing. I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, what happened next?
Well, I got to work. So, of course, I thought I knew how to run a business at 24 years old, but I so didn't know anything. And over, the next 21 years of my career, which leads up to now, I definitely learned my trade. I made lots of mistakes. I did enough things right that, I think statistics are showing that businesses close within the first 7 years. And I've been in business 21 years, going very strong, branching out into all different kinds of directions. So we do the debt collections. My mission with collections has always been somewhat different because it wasn't like I had this mad, passionate dream to become a debt collector. I didn't sit around as a child and dream up this career as a debt collector. But what I was mad passionate about was being a businesswoman. I always knew that someday I would own a business. And when I was like young and hanging out with my friends and they would be partying, I would sit there and design what my letterhead would look like. I was just always all about someday I was going to be this businesswoman. So when I got this opportunity to start a business, I definitely jumped at it, but I needed to make it my own. And my idea right from the beginning was that I wanted to be different as far as the way that people were treated, because in the collections industry, I feel like there's an issue with dehumanizing the process of collecting money from someone. And I really wanted to be different. So I decided to take a sales approach. But this failed. And it failed because people are really wired towards this negativity bias. And we talked about negativity bias on the last show, so I won't go into that deeply. But when all your other competition is basically scaring people to death in order to get them to pay, they're more likely to pay those people than to pay me. So sales was not going to work out. But once I really got to the root of the issue, which is all the shame and the unworthiness that people feel just by having a debt. Because see, having a debt is a psychological burden, and it's a burden that gets in between people and living the life that they want to live. My research has shown that if someone has a debt, they're less likely to start a business, they're less likely to apply for a mortgage, they're less likely to apply for certain jobs because a lot of jobs nowadays do require credit checks. They're even less likely to be in the same relationships because they don't feel worthy. And so once I understood that, I knew how to make a shift. And my goal became, I want people to feel good about paying their debt because having a debt is this burden. And it just sort of slowly over time all worked out. And that's how I created the communication code, which eventually became my best-selling book.
Okay. Now we have things to unpack in an entirely new direction. Mary, thank you for sharing that story. I want to go back and look at I think you have a unique perspective on the consciousness of money and debt, because you have an opportunity not only to see it, but to communicate with people around it. And there is so much depth to understanding the energetics of anything when you start to look at the language that is used around a particular topic. And so if we could go back and explore that, also given your expertise around communication. I know one of the things that I hear in my audience a lot, and where people run into a lot of challenges as female entrepreneurs, is asking their outstanding accounts how to get paid. Like we have a really hard, we can send an invoice, but we have a really hard time tracking people down for money owed. So there's two pieces with this. One, what is the mindset we need to put ourselves in? And two, how do we broker and broach that conversation in such a way that it leaves everyone feeling empowered?
Well, you asked the right question right off the bat. I feel like I want to send this episode to every single one of my clients, who are mostly doctors, by the way, because there's niche markets in collections just like anything else. And the market that I happen to work in is in healthcare. And so I really like working with doctors, hospitals, clinics, on any level. And one of the things that I see, and I can understand the struggle, because one, people who are healers on any level of the spectrum, I don't care if you're a chiropractor, a surgeon, a nurse, these are very nurturing people by nature. And by the way, veterinarians have the same problem. It can be a difficult conversation because of the anxiety that you feel to ask.
Right.
Because we have belief systems built around money. Like, for example, we might look at a person and the way that they're dressed, and we might make an assumption that that person couldn't afford our services. And it almost becomes like this game between the patient and the practitioner, where the patient might drop little hints like, oh, I'm having to pay for my son's surgery, or you know what I'm talking about, right? Where they're like dropping a little hints here and there throughout the conversation, which is actually making you feel like bad when you get to that point of having to ask for payment. So here's a couple of tips, but just know that the struggle is real, and that I have been working in this space for over 20 years, and actually working with doctors for even longer, because even when I was 13 years old and working at my parents' agency, the struggle was the same. And that becomes this like innately, we feel that there's something wrong in taking this from another person. And we need to, just like we're telling all of our patients, right, that it boils down to our belief systems. So it's in looking at those belief systems that we have ourselves about money. And in a lot of times when I'm teaching workshops, I might uncover that someone themselves might have grown up in a situation where their parents were in debt. So if their parents were in debt and they were watching their parents struggle, then they're going to form one kind of belief about billing and especially healthcare billing. You know what I mean? But on the other hand, you might have another person where they grew up in a family where it was a very strong moral compass that the right thing to do was pay the bills. And these people who have this belief that bills should be paid, it's a lot actually easier for them to ask for money than it is for someone who might have been around someone who was struggling financially. I know for myself, I've been on every possible place on the Monopoly board, because when I told you about, like, when my daughter was alive, I was on welfare and food stamps. I mean, like, I literally had nothing, and I wasn't able to necessarily structure my finances in a way that was abundance or whatever we would say in these. But then I've also been, on the other end of the spectrum, where now as an adult businesswoman, I've done very, very well for myself. But one of the reasons that I've been able to become this successful is because I didn't build up all these belief systems about money, or that being in debt was somehow bad. But the tips for your audience would be, the first thing I recommend is definitely setting up policies and procedures around your billing practices. Because one of the things that happens is, if you are in a one-on-one conversation with a patient and you have a decision to make, that's going to put pressure on you to decide in the way that you're going to be influenced by their set of circumstances. Okay. Whereas if you have a policy and procedure, you're really not making a decision on the spot. But as a business person, as an entrepreneur, I can tell you that anytime that I am pushed to make an on-the-spot decision, it doesn't usually work out very well for me. Have you ever noticed that?
I totally notice. Yes, 100%. Especially, and I will say, healthcare practitioners, where, like, I always just feel this struggle, right? Like, I just want to help. Just want to help you, like, right. And I know so many other, I just know so many other colleagues feel that way. And so taking that emotional reaction and response off the table, I can see how that's so helpful.
And it really is. Another helpful hint is, if your practice is big enough to where you as the provider is not the person having the conversation, I think that that's the best case scenario. So for example, you're the one working with the patient, but you have, say, an office manager or a billing specialist, or you have somebody who's doing that particular part of the job, and that the tasks are separated and they're not intermingled. Because it's not really appropriate for a patient to confront the doctor about money either. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I just want to say on that, one of the things we do in our practice, and I'm talking to practitioners out there right now, but anyone who has a business where you create an experience for people, we have a policy in our clinic where we have people's credit cards on file. They're encrypted in our system and they're billed afterwards, because there is an energetic shift that happens when you've had this incredibly powerful and intimate therapeutic experience with a practitioner. And then they look at you and they're like, and I'll take your credit card now, please. So if you're a solo practitioner, there's excellent technologies that also enable you to be able to deal with the payment piece and not necessarily have to interrupt that therapeutic presence and moment and experience that you've created for your patients. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah. Can I share something with you?
Yeah.
So I love paying people. Like, listen, I enjoy paying people because it is my pleasure and it is my honor to work with who I get to work with. And so I actually find immense pleasure in the movement of, because, like, people talk about finances or money as an energy, and there's all this stuff going around about money. Like, I kind of poke fun at it a little bit. People talking about there's money blocks, and I'm like, oh, great. Just another piece of BS for people to buy into that is really based on nothing. There's no such thing as a money block. But there is these beliefs that we have around money. So if you want to consider like a belief, like a block, but I know for me, it's my pleasure to pay you. I love it. I love, like, swiping my credit card and knowing that I'm getting airline miles. I just absolutely love that part of it. And, but I also know the other side of it, where people sort of hem-haw, or like maybe they make big sighing noises, or they might comment like, ugh, I can't believe this cost this much. And if that's the case, it's definitely going to change the emotional frequency of the session that you just had for sure. So I know anytime you follow a system, and what Megan just described is absolutely a system where you've already got their billing information on file, you already have the proper authorizations according to, your payment portals, to be able to just run that card. And then you don't even have to have the conversation, which is awesome. So step one is definitely setting up policies and procedures. Step two, I think, is training your staff to know how to interact when it comes to money. Because one of the things that we do, and especially that I see this a lot in healthcare, so I've been training billing and collections departments in healthcare for 15 years. And one of the biggest things that I see is they'll ask a question very passively. Like, here's an example. Is there any way you can pay this balance today? And the problem with asking a question passively in that way is that the answer to that question is most of the time no.
Right.
Is there any way you can pay this today? No, there's no way I could possibly pay this today. So it's really getting your verbiage out of the passivity zone and into the more direct zone. And by the way, on patient satisfaction surveys, the more direct the communication is, the higher the scores, which is kind of counterintuitive to what you would think, right?
I feel like so much of the language and interaction with respect to people and money is all so based on limiting beliefs.
Yes, because it's all an emotional charge and we're so triggered. And that's like with my training, the 5 principles of the communication code, we talk about that. Like I teach people how to learn when people are triggered and then what words to say to get them out of that triggered state. So when I say triggered, I really just mean they're activated in their fight or flight. And what we need to do is like deactivate their fight or flight and try to activate their parasympathetic. And I have a specific process of communication on how to do that. But like for simple tips for today, one of the easiest things is just as you're training your receptionist to take that payment, instead of saying something like, are you able to, or is there any way, or a passive yes or no question, is just simply to say, oh, your balance today or your copayment or however it is for your business, your balance today is $100. How will you be paying that?
I love how simple that is. And it reminded me of an experience we had with a receptionist in my previous clinic. She was uncomfortable, as many of us are when we're first starting out our own businesses, when we realize we can't afford our own services necessarily, when we're fresh out of school. And every time the balance would come up for our clients, she would open with, I am so sorry, your balance is this. And we overheard it one day and we were like, abort, you like, stop it. What are you doing? She's like, oh, it's so much. I was like, there is so much baggage that you just dropped in between this conversation. And I said, this person felt tremendously empowered to have made an investment in their health. Don't apologize to them for that. This was their priority. And, oh my gosh, it is so critical to make sure that your team is positioning this as an opportunity to again reinforce for people the power of their investment.
That particular person who was, empowered with that job, that she was bringing her own emotional triggers into the moment of asking for money. And so I call this fear of the freak out. It's when the representative has so much anxiety about asking for money. And so she might have been somebody who grew up where she was watching a hardship happen with like her grandparents or aunts, someone close to her having a hardship over money, or her having her own hardships over money, because sometimes we make an assumption that everybody's in the same situation we are, but money's all relative. If you ask one person what is a lot of money, they might say $300, and you might ask another person and they say $3, and you might ask another person and they say $300,000. Because money is relative to each person and what they're comfortable with. I would, if I were in your shoes, I would, as part of my training agenda, I would explain that every patient who walks through our door, every participant, every client who walks through the door, they know that our services are a la carte. They're not free, and they have somewhat of an idea of the expense before walking in the door, and they're making that choice for themselves. But really, if we add up how much money is wasted on things like unhealthy things, cigarettes, going to fast food joints, pizza, really it balances out. So people make choices according to their priorities. And so when I was much younger and I had to pick and choose, I would choose to make that investment to pay for my health over paying for an investment of like junk food and other things that to me were non-necessities. I was on this yoga retreat in Hawaii over the new year it was 2016 to 2017. And I met this woman and she had a very serious case of kyphosis. It was one of the worst cases I had ever seen. And she could barely move. And she was much older. She was probably like 62. So she was much older than me by about 20 years. Well, I said something to her because I have kyphosis and I was paying to get this traction therapy done. And I told her that I felt like her kyphosis could really be significantly improved. And she goes, yeah, I got a quote, but it's not covered by my insurance, so I'm not going to do it. Now, I looked at her and I said, you realize this vacation you're on costs more than that treatment plan? And she said, yeah. And there's a problem there. Do you know what I mean? I never personally make a healthcare decision based on how much insurance will pay, ever. Because they're not looking at my best interest. Only I am. For sure.
And listen, I think the conversation around money and health and investment in self is it's deep and it's extremely complex. But at the end of the day, when we step out of it, it is simply a matter of prioritization. And if you can't afford to be healthy, then I promise you definitely can't afford to eat pizza.
Exactly.
Right? Like it's really that simple. Like these complicated things are sometimes very simple. And I totally understand that. What has been, in the work that you have done, what has been the most powerful way of broaching a conversation with someone when they really do owe you money and their feet are firmly planted in the sand? Like, how do you unpack that piece for them?
Well, I want to go right back to making sure that you have a financial policy. So I'm the person that's going to harp on that, making sure there's a financial policy and making sure that it is signed. And so one of the things that can easily be done is just bringing the conversation back to the agreement points on the contract. So, the person signed a contract, they agreed to services. And if you have policies and procedures set up, hopefully what you're doing is this is not to shame anyone who's not doing this. Okay. It's just like, if you're not doing this, consider that you could move in this direction of doing this and your practice will be better in having done so. So let's say, for example, you have a policy that says accounts that are past due by either 90 days or 120 days is going to be referred to our collection agency. Now, to me, that's a non-negotiable thing. It's in writing and it says this is going to happen. And so what you have to also be able to do as the practitioner or as the business owner is to be able to follow your own policies. And I know that you asked me about the specific conversation, and I'm going to get to that. But in order to empower yourself to be able to have the conversation in the first place, it's good if you have this foundation set. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So if you have this foundation laid, then the conversation is going to look very plain. It's going to say, the balance due is $200. How will you be taking care of that? And then they're going to say whatever they say, like my dog just died. Whatever they're going to say, okay? They're going to give you the story. This is the time for the story. And you're going to hear the story. And then what I teach in my trainings is that whatever they say, we need to validate what they said. Because the human brain, I call them these, we have a checklist in our mind. And in order to be able to emotionally move on in a conversation, we need to be able to check the box that says we've been heard. So the very first part of this is you want to validate what the patient is saying to you. And validation is not an apology. So your other person who is I'm so sorry. It's I understand your circumstances. It must be very difficult. I'm so glad that you shared that with me. That's a validation. the thing that really sets me apart from other debt collectors is that I believe in the power of empathy and compassion in order to create an ultimate rapport and connection with your patients. And that's really what's important, because the level of connection you have with your patient is going to determine how that relationship goes. And Megan, I just want to tell you that if you're unable to establish that, and if it's something over payment, this is probably not a person you want in your practice anyway.
Probably not.
Right. And we need to also recognize that and be able to let go. Sometimes a doctor might think, I don't ever want to turn someone away for payment, but like, how is that person energetically affecting you? And I'll tell you a little story. It's a local doctor here in my town. He owned a sleep study clinic, and he sold it to our bigger clinic in town. And he called me one day out of the blue, years and years after he had sold his practice. And I'm sure he made a ton of cash selling it because he was the only game in town. You know what I mean? So he calls me up and he goes, Mary, you're never going to believe what happened. And I'm like, what? Like, why are you calling me? And he says, well, I ordered pizza last night, and the guy who showed up at my door to deliver the pizza owes me $45 from like 7 years ago. And I said, yeah. And he's like, well, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, did you pay for the pizza? And he goes, yeah. But here's the thing. That kid delivering that pizza, he didn't recognize that doctor. There's no way. You know what I mean? He's just delivering a pizza. But like, the doctor was still holding on to it. So one of the things that I say often to clients is we have to drop this emotional charge we have over the people that owe us money. We need to be able to let that go. It is so important, because I guarantee you that pizza driver is not losing sleep at night.
I guarantee you he's not.
Right. But do you see how it's still affecting this doctor? To the point where he was so agitated over it that he called me up. I just had something in my throat. I had to take a little drink.
That's okay. Real life happening here.
I know, right? Okay, because I get so excited talking about money and collections. My throat chakra is burning right now.
And I'm so glad you do, because I think it's a niche that not many women in particular are like super passionate about, but you bring this really unique perspective. And I'm glad that we went there on this interview.
Yeah, me too. And so, all right, going back, especially because I've said I've been on both ends of the spectrum. It's a burden, it's not only a psychological burden to owe the money, but it's a psychological burden to be a creditor. Because how much time and energy do you spend worrying about whether someone's going to pay you or not? That is also a psychological burden. So no matter which side of the playing board that you're on, this is still affecting you. Whether you owe the money or whether the money is owed to you, it is an equal psychological burden. And I get to be the person in the middle solving it. And I think that if there was somebody that had to do this job in life, I'm glad it's me, because I am really good at it. And so after you've validated this patient and you've let them know, you've created a moment of empathy and compassion by saying, I understand your circumstances. That must be really difficult. And I have a lot of series of phrases that I always share when I'm teaching this process. The next step that you want to do is plant a seed of happiness. Because first of all, when they're telling you that story, they're going to be a bit emotionally charged. When you take a moment to validate them and consciously acknowledge what they've just said to you, give them that space to be heard and allow them to emotionally move on. Number one, it stops them from repeating the story over and over and over again, which is likely to happen in these kinds of situations. And then number two, they've created a connection so that they're ready to hear the next thing. And the next thing needs to be a jolt of happiness. Planting a seed of happiness in the patient's mind will reinforce that there's going to be a positive outcome. And so you can simply do this by saying something like, well, the great news is we have many payment options available for you. I can run your card, or I can put you on a payment plan. I mean, whatever, according to every single office, it's going to be different. Some people have like a credit type of situation where they can refer people to like a care credit. or, something out of their office to where they would be getting a small loan or a line of credit, so to speak. Are you familiar with those?
I'm not necessarily, but I love what you're saying, where you're like, I love it, but here's the good news, and here's how we're going to solve the problem. Like, because it shifts how people's brains are perceiving the situation.
Right. And so the old way of doing this, like going back to your person that was apologizing, if she were just hearing the story of the whatever happened, she might say something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, you owe $200 today." And that would be the absolute wrong way to handle it. Because every time, and this is why, if you're familiar with me at all, we have this do not say list. And the do not say list is a list of words that we never say, because those particular words are going to trigger a fight or flight situation in the patient. So we want to say the positive words, because positive words reinforce a positive outcome and negative words reinforce a negative outcome. So by saying, the great news is we have many options available. We're going to work this out. You're really planting a seed that everything is going to be okay. And then the last part is just saying the expectation of what's going to happen next. So whatever those next steps are, and for every business, it's going to be different, but whatever those next steps are, you just say it. And then you just put this together in a little 3-step process: validate, seed of happiness, action statement.
Well, you make it sound so darn simple to ask people to pay their bills. I love it when we find people's core skills this way. Did you always know this was a skill set for you? Like, how long did it take you? And I'm not talking about necessarily collections, but like, how long did it take you to find your groove and your flow in your own business as an entrepreneur?
Megan, I'm sure, like so many of the people that in your community do the work that they do because they needed to heal themselves. And I am no exception to that. It's kind of like, I really believe in the power of purpose and mission. And, I was telling you about my daughter who had this severe brain damage. So when I was 19 years old, and of course this predates the internet, I used to go to the library and I would study the brain, because I just believed that we were going to get our miracle. And I believed that, I knew about stem cells back in the early 90s. Like, I really became like a neuroscience nerd because I wanted so much to heal her. And also, I had gone through so much trauma in my own life. Being out on my own at 16, I was abandoned when I was very young at 3 years old. I just had this trauma story, okay? And a lot of my work in the personal development world is all about like rewriting these trauma stories, understanding that trauma, our bodies are like libraries and they store everything that's ever happened to us. And all of this trauma, it gets into our system. And that's I don't have to tell you this, because like, your whole world is about healing people from these traumas, because that those things manifest into illness later on in life. And so one of the things is that I was already learning about the brain. And then the unthinkable for me happened when I had my second child. He was also special needs, and he is on the autism spectrum. He's now 18 years old, but the autism spectrum is a disorder of the nervous system. And he is extremely aggressive and reactive. And I could tell you all kinds of like fun little personal development stories regarding him. But like, I can tell you one thing is that raising a child with special needs really helped my spiritual development, because it shook off all my belief systems. Because here I believed I was supposed to have a boy who was going to be on the football team, not like head of the Rubik's Cube Club. But that was a belief system, that boys do sports. And then I would also say, like, going through my own divorce. But when it really happened was one day, it was so simple, Megan. One day I looked at the phone and I said, I want the next person who calls to be happier at the end of the call than they were at the beginning. I had no idea what was going to happen. At this point, I was kind of at the end of my rope. I was trying this sales approach, but at the same time, conversations in collections were always getting uncomfortable. Everyone, like, I'd walk around the office and people would be loud, and we were getting yelled at like 24/7. People were threatening us. It was just terrible. And I thought, I no longer care about collecting this money. I want my job to be somehow, some way. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I just want the person to feel happier by the time they're off the phone with me, period. And then that, the if you've ever read like what's it called, Psycho-Cybernetics, or the Cybernetics book, where they teach you all about the reticular activating system and the power of the subconscious mind, and all of these things kicked in because it was like I was, communicating with my soul or the higher self, or the realm of like, here was your mission, Mary. This is what you're supposed to do in the world. It just kicked in, and the system sort of downloaded into me over the next several years of how to do this. Like, we started with one thing. We started with eliminating the negative words. And just in that, the first year alone of creating that part of it, our income increased 34%.
It's amazing.
Who wouldn't want 34% more money this year than they had last year?
Simply by changing the intention of language.
It turned a business into a mission for me, because my mission truly is to help people with this whole karmic debt situation. When I was going through more my like spiritual awakening in life, which is really a big part of my path now. In fact, it's probably the biggest part of my path in life that I spend my time on. It's gone way past a hobby, and it's full blown like into the spiritual awakening realm. And, but I was terrified, Megan, because several years ago, when I really knew that I wanted to take this other path in life, and it had gone past personal development and it was into like mystical spiritual development now, I was terrified I was going to have to give up my career, because being a debt collector did not seem congruent with a spiritual path. And I think that this is also this. I'm not the only person who struggles with this, because I think that a lot of spiritual people struggle with the idea of making money, which I had been told. I can't tell you how many times I've got like an astrology reading or something, and they're like, well, part of your life's mission is to help light workers understand money. And I'm like, okay, that's a really big job, because they so don't. Or not all of them, obviously, but like, I get it that there's a bit of a guilt that happens if we're on a spiritual path, and we need to deal with money, because that's sort of like the earth way. So I was at Omega Institute at a workshop, and I met this woman who was an Akashic Records reader. And I was talking to her, and I was like, I don't know what to do, because I don't know how to do any other job. I don't know how to support myself if I'm not a debt collector. And she looked at me and she goes, don't you get it? She said, your work is your spiritual path. And all of a sudden I had this light bulb moment, because what she said to me next was, when people have a debt, it's almost like a karmic debt where they've come into this life with this attached to them. And she said, every time you're helping someone clear up their debt situation, whether they're a client or the person who owes the money, she's like, you're clearing their karma. And every time you're clearing their karma, you're clearing your own. And oh my gosh, that was the thing I needed to see or hear to change my perception on the situation. And that is when I stepped even more fully into my role as a debt collector. Like, from that moment on, I owned it. I'm like, this is who I am. This is the mission I'm on. And I am here to change the collective consciousness of how we think about debt, period.
That's so powerful, because I'm sitting here, I'm like, I want to become a debt collector. Like, how amazing! Like, just that idea that you are swiping clear these held debts, and that feeling of needing to reciprocate is so powerful in us as humans, and absolutely it drives a spiritual path, and our need to not owe people things. Like, it's such a compelling concept to us as conscious beings. I love that you had that experience. It's totally amazing. I'm wondering if you can share with people some of the things that you have done, and I know we were talking about this before, in the last year, to really elevate you and your game and your journey as an entrepreneur. Because I know a mastermind, for example, is something that you hadn't explored before, and now you had. And I'd just love to people to hear some of these evolutions for you in that role as well.
Yeah, what's really interesting about like my personal career, that it's like I've got this debt collection company, but I felt very pulled to write a book, which that. And I wrote this book, Conscious Communications, and there was a part of me that, and especially like going through the 2-year process of writing the book, publishing the book, getting the book out there, doing interviews, it was very clear to me that my day-to-day career, like my average day was about to change drastically, because I went from being, really steeped in the CEO type of duties to this other thing, like being I don't even know what to call it, like a thought leader, an influencer. I don't even really know what I am, but I'm a person who knows a lot of stuff and loves to share what I know. So I wanted to do more of that. And one of the things that was really super important for me to be able to do that, because so many people own businesses and then they feel like that business becomes a ball and chain or shackles. Do you know what I mean? Or they're like imprisoned to this business because they can't step away from it for even 1 minute in order to pursue other dreams. Well, a true entrepreneur typically is so multifaceted and wants to do multiple things, not just one thing. And so a lot of you might be feeling that, like, okay, I have my core business, but there's other things that I want to pursue. And one of the reasons that I was able to do that is because I had such a great foundation set up with like everything. I like to call it the skeleton of my business was really set up with all of these like work instructions for everything. Everything had policies and procedures. So everything can basically run without me. And everyone in my office is trained on the communication code. So I know that everyone's communicating consistently the same way, whether I'm in the building or not. And so that like gave me the freedom to pursue this other dream that I had. And so since the book's come out and it's been about a year, I've been able to join this mastermind. It's called the Unicorn Club. It's an all-female mastermind. And it was definitely a stretch for me. And so if any of you have ever considered it, I know that Megan has a mastermind. I say go for it, because even just in my first meeting, the caliber of people that I was around was mind-blowing. I went from feeling like I was constantly the smartest person in the room, which I'm not saying that from a place of ego. I'm saying that from a place of it was uncomfortable for me because I couldn't grow that way. If you are always the smartest person in the room, how can you grow? For the first time in a long time, I was not the smartest person in the room. I was thrilled that I was kind of like the baby unicorn. And all these other women, I was with the executive producer of the Oprah Winfrey Show. And it was like, are you kidding me right now? Like, are you kidding me? I'm sitting next to Marianne Williamson. Like, literally, I go to this mastermind and Marianne Williamson walks in the door. It was so amazing. I get chills thinking about it. And she's talking to us. She's like, you're all successful businesswomen, women. And she looks at us and she's like, so what? And I was like, listening, tuning into what she had to say. And her message was, so what? You were given this power of manifestation. You were given this power of creation to learn how to build these businesses. But if you're not impacting the world, you're really just doing something for yourself. And so what? Who cares? And she's absolutely right, because what we really need to be doing, especially as powerful women in today's world, is understand that our job right now is to lift the rest of the world up. That is so what it just has to happen. And, for a person on a spiritual path, can you imagine? I was in seventh heaven.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine what that is like. And I agree with you, and it's not from an ego place, but I have a policy that if, I'm working with a group or I'm engaging in something and I don't feel like I can never want to feel like I'm pulling the room. I want to feel like the room is pulling me. And there's always ebbs and flows in that. And there's always gonna be areas where you have strength to contribute. But I used to want to be the smartest person in the room. And now I actively disengage from things where I'm in that role because there's just no growth there. And you have to make that decision really quickly, but it's powerful, right? When you walk into these places and you go, whoa, I'm going to be challenged in a totally new way. And it builds a different sense of confidence. It's amazing. And I'm so glad you're doing that.
Yeah. And I got to, at this group meeting, we got on a trapeze. So one of the women, the meeting was at her house and she has a trapeze in her backyard. And she just wrote a book called Scale or Fail. And so she brought these, I guess you'd call them trapeze trainers in to show us all how to swing on the trapeze. And I've always sort of chased those kind of adventures where you do something physical as a moment of empowerment. But I can tell you that, like, walking up that ladder, you walk up like a 30-foot ladder to get to this tiny platform. It was and then you get on the platform just to be able to get on the trapeze. You have to jump and then you have to let go and fall down into the net. But all of that was such a great entrepreneurial metaphor, because like you are spending your life sort of climbing this ladder, and it's very scary because becoming an entrepreneur is not a guarantee of anything.
No, that's true. It's a guarantee of very few things, actually.
You have to be able to, like I've often said, like my ability to take on risk is pretty good. Like I can do that. I can live in that uncertainty and I can thrive in it. And it allows me to make just powerful decisions off of a gut feeling that other people would be like, no way would I do that. But I'm very strong at doing that kind of stuff. So that's kind of like the climbing the ladder. And then you get on the platform. It reminded me of when you're sort of leveling up, and I don't like the terminology leveling up, but when you're expanding, I like the word expanding much better. When you're expanding in your life, when you're growing in your spirituality, you're growing in your family, you're growing in your business, whatever it is, we're always growing and expanding. But when we get to sort of that next level, there's this feeling of isolation because you don't know who your tribe is anymore. You've sort of outgrown the old. You need to maybe let go of some relationships, but there's this feeling of aloneness and isolation. And that's very much where I was at, because my whole life was changing. It just got turned upside down because of this book and Hay House and all of the things that I was doing. And my day-to-day had changed and I felt very lonely. And so I really believe that there is this loneliness at the top for a while because there's no welcoming committee. It's like you get there and, oh, boom, your dreams come true, but there's no welcoming committee. And so you're kind of left going, well, I don't know. I don't like this. So at that moment, when you're on that new platform, that new plateau, you have two choices. You can go back down and make things the way that they were when you were comfortable, or you can jump. And so I guess I choose to jump. So I jumped. And then the next thing is you have to let go because you don't know what's going to happen next. Anyway, it was just a really cool moment and metaphor.
Well, and I love that. And you do have to let go. Otherwise, you get retracted back to where you were. One question before we transition to those last rapid fire questions. What do you want your legacy to be?
I know what I said last year, and it's changed and it's good. I think it changes all the time. But I just want my legacy to be as someone who is really helping people to open up to their own purpose, their own power, and their own awakening through whatever means that is necessary.
Our body is a series of interconnected systems. What is happening in one system puts pressure on another. We understand this intuitively. And yet the most powerful medical system in the world, Western medicine, continues to evaluate our health in individualized silos. We have assessments related to cardiovascular health, oncology, respirology, dermatology. We have individual silos of expertise. When we assess the body from a functional perspective in our practice, we want to understand not whether you are necessarily fine in all of these different systems, but whether or not they are functioning in an integrative manner in a way that moves you closer to optimal health. While there are lots of functional tests that we can do to be able to assess that, technology is enabling us to start to look at this thing on the basis of artificial intelligence through the aggregation of data. We do this in our practice using a tool called Living Matrix, and I want to make this assessment available to you. If you go to our new website, Entrepologyperformancelabs.com, on the front page, you will see an opportunity for you to opt into your personalized functional medicine quiz. Completing this questionnaire will take approximately 40 minutes of your time, and when you're finished, we're going to prompt you to have an opportunity to sit down from someone on our medical team to review your individualized results. We are all on big missions. We are all trying to change the world. It's no longer sufficient for our health to simply be fine. For us to achieve what we want to do as badass women with a vision for how we can help the world, we need to move our health to a place of optimal. And I invite all of you the opportunity to see how close to that line you really are. Go to entrepologyperformancelabs.com and do your quiz today. Well, let's leverage that as we start to move into the last part of the interview. And this is where we're going to look at our key performance indicators. So unlike key performance indicators related to our business and money for financial metrics, these are ones that I think are metrics related to how we are living our lives and moving us towards those end goals. So indulge me. I've got a few new questions over last year, but let's give everyone a little bit of an insight. First question for you. I used to ask about the morning, but now I want to know about the night. Do you have a consistent evening routine? And if so, can you share it?
I do. So I typically in the evening, I'm reading or watching some type of spiritual mind food. So right now I'm currently reading the Michael Brown Presence Process that I've just started. I really spend my evenings in spiritual study. So whether I'm watching a YouTube video, listening to a lecture, maybe even Graham Hancock,
Yeah.
That's just a throwback from our pre-show conversation. Or I love reading Paul Selig's books. So every night when I'm going to bed, I'm typically drinking some kind of tea, or I am while I'm reading or studying, whatever it is I'm studying. And also I like to plant seeds in my mind of dreaming. I like to study dreaming. And so when I go to bed, I might write myself a question that I'd like answered in the dream or something along those lines.
Okay. Second question. What is your big, hairy, audacious goal for 2019?
Oh my gosh, I have so many of them. I think I wrote out 10 of them. A big, big goal is I am moving towards much bigger speaking events, and I just signed a big media contract. So it's looking like getting myself to a place of being more well-known in the media. I don't know what that looks like right now because it's just starting, but definitely have goals of just getting myself out there in the national media.
What is something you were scared of, but you conquered and it enabled you to move forward?
I have been very scared of fear that has to do with trauma. And I have completely repositioned all of my beliefs around this and understand that all of the things that have happened to me in my life, all of the traumas, the tragedies have all been what has built a woman of influence, a woman of radical resilience, and it's put me in such a powerful position. So the things that I might have in the past looked at and felt like that I was never going to be XYZ because this happened to me or that happened to me, I would now say I am a woman of XYZ because this happened to me or that happened to me.
I love that shift.
Thank you.
What is something totally badass about you that people would not otherwise know?
Oh, well, I am such an adventurer. When I was a little girl, there was a part of me, and obviously there's a part of me that wanted to be a businesswoman, but if I didn't get that career, I wanted to be an archaeologist. And so I do a lot of badass things. Like I just went to Peru and stayed in the jungle. And now when I say the jungle, I mean the real jungle. Like there was no electricity, there was no resort, there was huts and a river for 10 days. And did 5 ayahuasca ceremonies, also did a Cambo cleanse, which was not fun. Don't recommend it, except for, I guess it's good. So I'm always doing these outrageous adventures. Like if Elon Musk called me up and said I could go up in one of those rockets, I'd probably be like, okay, yes, sign me up. Let me just update my life insurance policy.
I love that. Who do you admire or look up to?
So many people. I mean, I just have to tell you that I am mad passionately in love with Oprah Winfrey. I mean, I admire her so much. I was listening to a YouTube video. It was like a 10-minute recording of her just talking about stuff. And her ability to talk about things that would have previously been considered woo-woo, like she's talking about everything being source energy. You know, she's gone full-on metaphysical teacher, and she is, there's no apology about it. Like, she is all about it. She's willing to put it out there, and she can speak on it so eloquently. And I just really, really admire her ability to do that. And, you know, her massive ability to make change in this world.
Yes, she has left a legacy that is quite unbelievable and unprecedented. Last question for you, Mary. You answered this last year, but I am always going to want to know from people. Entrepreneurism. Are we born this way, or do we learn to become entrepreneurs?
You know, and I changed my mind on it. So I feel like I came into this lifetime probably knowing how to run a business with my eyes closed. So I definitely think it's just part of my soul imprint of who I am. But I also believe that I chose the circumstances that gave me the life lessons that I was going to need to develop the radical resilience to be able to weather the storms of being a true entrepreneur. Because that path is not for everybody, for sure.
It is absolutely not. And even if you have the skill to run a business, you're quite right. There's a whole other emotional requirement to being an entrepreneur. Mary, like always, conversations with you are so fun and fascinating. I know people are wanting to have more of your wisdom. Where can we send them so they have more access to you?
Yeah, now I love any kind of social media. I love LinkedIn especially. So if anyone wants to find me on LinkedIn, the name is Mary Shores, Shores. Of course, Instagram. I know that a lot of your social media family is on Instagram. I think it's Mary_Shores. Of course, we have Facebook and Twitter, and we have all the things. And my website is maryshores.com. And that's pretty easy to find. I also always say, if you resonated with what we talked about and you want to learn more, especially about the communication piece or business, check out the book Conscious Communications on Amazon or wherever you buy books. Read the description and some reviews. I think you'll know right away whether the book is for you.
Amazing. Mary, like always, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed our conversation and would like to hear more, head on over to Stitcher or iTunes and subscribe to the Entrepology podcast. We would also really appreciate a quick review. When people have their health, they can change the world. Let us keep you healthy and you go change the world.